Radar Update and Review. This is Daniel Vallis from InformedChristians.com, a website ministry devoted to discerning current events from a Christian perspective. Today we're going to be looking at even more information, but also reviewing some of what we've covered so we don't get lost. Again, this is just a watch, not a prediction. I'm just showing you what has already happened. I don't know what is going to happen, but we can see from what is going on that we should be very wary and cautious and vigilant. Already we've seen a number of events happen just within the past 2 weeks. It's an incredible number of signals that have been going on. On November 9th, Disney, again our favorite person, they released the first trailer for their movie Finding Dory. At first it sounds rather innocent, but what is the movie about? Well, it's the sequel to the Disney movie Finding Nemo, which is a story that centers around clownfish, and there's even going to be one in the sequel too as well. So clownfish, that should ring a bell. Where have we seen clownfish lately? Oh, that's right. We've seen them on the cover of The Economist. 2 clownfish. Why are they here? It's a signal. When you see these, it's a marker. When you see 2 clownfish appear up in the news, or a reference to them, it's pointing to that time period. Just like all the other signals that we've been looking at, how they've been pointing within this very narrow time of just within the past 13 days, really. Then just a few days ago, on the 9th, the Daily Mail featured a picture exclusive inside Donald Trump's $100 million penthouse in his Trump Tower, which happens to be on the 66th floor. It looks like a very nice flat, but the pictures brought some very interesting things to mind, not especially the fact that it's on the 66th floor. That was kind of eyebrow-raising. But in looking at some of the pictures that the Daily Mail annotated, we see that over the fireplace is a picture of Apollo, led by Aurora, the Greek goddess of the dawn. Apollo is Zeus's son and one of the most powerful of the Greek gods. A very unusual picture to find suspiciously in an apartment that's on the 66th floor. Well, okay, maybe you could say maybe he likes just Greek art. Okay. Well, let's look. What does he have up on the ceiling? On the ceiling is a scene of Greek or Roman gods, and seems likely to be Apollo again, who is often portrayed crossing the heavens in his chariot. We see a reference to Prometheus, who we talked about in a couple of videos back. Reference to Pan. This isn't stuff you buy at Walmart. Now, he had this purposely painted on his ceiling. Now here's another view. They didn't get a lot of pictures, but he had to hire someone to paint and tell them what to paint on the ceiling. Apollo riding his chariot across the sky. Plus he has another picture of it over the fireplace. Very suspicious. They didn't take a lot of pictures in this photo spread, but it's interesting that there was one picture close-up of some jewels. Some jewels that were just happened to be scattered around in an open jewelry box that just happened to be setting out on the couch. Everything else in the house is nice and neat, but for some reason, this one little jewelry box is left open, out in the middle of nowhere, out on a couch, open, with just a few watches spread all over it. And you could tell they were purposefully just sprinkled over it there. You can obviously tell they're not kept there, not neat and orderly and whatnot. But the story said, oh, Milena, she designs and sells a collection of watches and rings, and these are just some of her watches. But if you look at the picture, it's very jumbled, it's very deliberate, it's put out in the middle, but they're pushing watches. They just grabbed a bunch of nice looking watches, sprinkled them over this jewelry case and said, oh, look, this is how we have our house all the time. No, it's a signal. It's a time signal. That's what I'm taking it. They're bringing attention to time in connection with Trump, with the 66th flat, plus Apollo twice. And they have other gods in his apartment too as well, other statues of gods. But this is very deliberate. It's also a highbrow message. You can tell by the context of who has it, Donald Trump, that, this is done very deliberately. This should also be a wake-up call for people who think that Donald Trump is going to save America if he becomes president. No, he's a controlled stooge just like everybody else. Politics is pure theater. You don't get up into that upper club until you sell your soul and sear your conscience, and then you might be invited into that exclusive club. It's very controlled. It's all theater. Just stop. You're wasting your time if you're listening to debates and all that. It's all controlled. So here we see signals, again, of Apollyon, Apollo, time, very deliberate within these 2-week period that we've been looking at. But then it was interesting, on the 10th, we saw that one very strong signal of Damascus, with the Damascus steel knife held right up in front of the photographer's camera. So then it shouldn't surprise us that the very next day came out a story that Israel just hit some Syrian army sites in Damascus. And supposedly they hit some areas right near the Damascus airport. It's hard to get details because Israel won't acknowledge it necessarily. But several military sites were hit. And apparently it looks like Israel had probably detected a weapons convoy in the area. Israeli officials have said in the past that transferring certain kinds of weapons to terror organizations like Hezbollah were pretty much a red line with Israel. The timing of this is very interesting. We should expect over the next few days to see an escalation. Pretty soon, Israel's probably going to hit the wrong target. There's Russians in the area. Iran's working in the area too. This is a recipe for disaster. So expect any day now things to escalate, especially when they're giving signaling to keep your eye on Damascus. And it is interesting what the Bible tells us, that there will be trouble in the evening. So the Bible does tell us kind of a general time frame when to expect trouble and things to really ramp up. So expect some type of incident to happen in the eventide. And then, of course, the Bible says by the next morning, Damascus will be gone. So we got signaling to watch it, but then we also see that trouble is, in a sense, already starting to pick up again around Damascus. On Wednesday, 2 Russian TV stations had full stories about how plans of a long-range nuclear torpedo were leaked from a meeting that weren't supposed to be shown on TV, that somehow got accidentally leaked out to the public. And they were kind of wringing their hands of, oh no, there's secret data, it wasn't supposed to be shown on TV, and it was. Well, what was the weapon? It was some type of robotic mini-submarine, apparently with nuclear capabilities. And a lot of people were debating, is this an accident, or is this a deliberate leak? Is it a signal to Russia's enemies? And it's very interesting that the Kremlin spokesman, who normally denies any type of rumor or speculation, he actually came out and confirmed that, oh yes, these secret images and this secret report was leaked. And so the fact that he's being very candid up front about it even raises more eyebrows, that this was done very, very deliberately. But I don't think it was a message to Russia's enemies. I think it was a even broader message, because it fits in with the patterns that we're going to be looking for, and we'll see that in a second. You can't tell me that Putin and the top military leaders, ex-KGB people, that something like this would just happen, or that they let certain people just in their briefings. No. This is very deliberate. This is very planned. This is a deliberate leak. And when you consider the technology, anytime a weapon is leaked to the public, it's already obsolete. They already have something way better. And so if they are leaking something to the public or allowing it to leak, it's no longer a concern to them because they got something way more powerful. And generally the military in the developed countries have technology that's 50 to 100 years more advanced than what the civilian world even knows about. So I see it more as a general, broad, deliberately released pattern to those who are looking for it and those who are following the program guide. It's a leak to them, not to armchair generals to debate about weapons and stuff. No, it was to a much broader audience. When we look back at the economics cover, we see a drone. And with all these symbols, you have to look beyond the most obvious wording when they put wording on there. Because most people focus on the Amazon or books with this one. But no, at its core, what is this object? It's a drone. And it's also closely flying around nuclear missiles and nuclear mushroom clouds. And what gets leaked in the news the other day? A Russian nuclear drone. That symbol was now broadcast. But it's also interesting when we take the drone in other contexts too, because if we look just slightly down below it, we see an ISIS figure and with splatter all over the wall. And in military jargon, a bug splat is a drone-targeted hit. And what have we seen in the past few weeks, starting at the end of September? Russia getting involved, targeting ISIS and smashing them. And they've been starting slow, but very recently, just within the past 2 weeks, they've really ramped it up and they're smashing ISIS. So we can see on 2 different levels how this pattern is being broadcasted. A nuclear drone and droning and strikes against ISIS, splattering them. But then, to drive it home even further, on Tuesday we find out that ISIS released another video where they threatened to attack Israel. And guess what was seen in the video? A big blood splat. Everything you see in the media and the news is very, very controlled. ISIS is just a pawn and a puppet, controlled. They want you to get focused on, oh, they're Muslim extremists and they cut off people's heads and they do all this stuff. They're the bad guys. They're not saints, but they're controlled puppets. They're controlled, they're pawns, they're moved around. They're to affect geopolitical situations and maneuverings. Russia knows who controls them. The U.S. knows who controls them. Israel knows who controls them. It's controlled. It's not just some ragtag bunch of people gathering together. No, it's a controlled opposition and controlled theater. And again, when we see very deliberate symbolism in material that they produce that matches up with the pattern that's in the program guide, as one of the signals that Satan's disciples should look for, that should really wake you up to stop playing and paying attention to the media's, how they want to manipulate you and how they tell you the narrative. And this is why it is so important to understand current events from a Christian perspective. The secular world has an agenda and a spin on why they tell you certain things. And even the secular truthers out there, they will still only tell you current events and interpret them from a secular perspective. As Christians, as believers in Jesus Christ, we must look at current events through a Christian biblical worldview. Have a desire for truth, regardless whether it upsets our personal plans. Have a desire to know truth. And someone who desires to know truth, regardless of the form that it arrives in, will find truth. And when we pursue truth and are hungry for truth, we'll have an understanding of the times, a true understanding of times, so that we will know what we're supposed to do. So we'll know what we're also not supposed to do, what we're not supposed to pay attention to, what we're not supposed to get involved with. A lot of Christians have very little understanding of the times, so they will spend a lot of energy, their passions, their zeal in politics, and they'll get all worked up when they could be channeling that energy to more productive things, and time and energy and all that. So who tells you what to do? Who pulls your strings? Who pulls your passions and your zeals? Who tells you, is it easy to steer you around and push you around like a pawn because you're so predictable? Or do you seek to understand the times so that you know what to do and you and God are the only ones who direct your path in life? This is why we need to be paying attention. There's a lot at stake. Well, jump to today, the 12th. We've been watching Star Wars a lot. All the different announcements that they made, and they've been making a lot of announcements about Apollyon specifically. So it shouldn't surprise us today that they released a little tidbit about one of the actors and the character that she plays. And they brought attention to, on the poster, this one little alien is who this particular actor is playing. And supposedly this character is the one who in the trailer said all that narrative about the eyes, drawing attention to the eyes. What did she say? In the trailer, she said, I have lived long enough to see the same eyes in different people. I see your eyes. I know your eyes. It's very interesting that even in the poster and in the movie and the character development, they give her special goggles to bring emphasis to her eyes too. Why? Because it's all about the symbolism of the eye. And the one who's known for his eyes, Apollyon. And to even further drive that home, on the poster, what do they surround her by? 2 robots who have one prominent eye. 2 of them. Well, what's going to happen tomorrow? I have no idea. Tomorrow's Friday the 13th. But one thing that is coming out is a movie called The 33. But it has some very suspicious storyline and symbols in it. And just by looking at the poster for the movie, it's very interesting that they form a light pyramid. They form a pyramid, you can see it subtly underneath the 33, but then all the lights, very illuminating with very different points of light. When are they doing this? Right in the middle of Diwali, the Festival of Lights, right in the UN declared Year of Light. Okay, so that already brought us to our attention. And some people say, well, you're just reading too far into that. Well, let's go about 2 seconds into their trailer, and they have, who's producing this? Phoenix Pictures. Phoenix, the mythological creature that burns itself and rises out of the ashes. Lucifer, very right in your face. What is the story about? It's about a mine that collapsed, 33 survivors who were down there, coming up from the underground, how they were rescued. And even the trailer makes a big deal about this big rock that's bigger than 2 Empire State Buildings, and they called it the heart of the mountain. The trailer message is coming up from the heart of the earth. A phoenix arising from the heart of the earth. Which in the broader context of what we've seen just in the past 2 weeks, it's Apollyon coming out of the bottomless pit. That is the signal that is being broadcast to the world. Get ready for that. He is awakening, coming from the underworld. since we have seen so many symbols lately, especially from this cover, I thought it really good to review and recap some of the symbols so we don't get lost in all the trees. So let us review and do a quick overview and really drive home, because we've been looking at it piecemeal too as well. Let's take a fresh look at the cover. We're not going to cover all the symbols, but we're going to look at the major ones that we've covered and really see the incredibleness, the uncoincidence, if that's a word, of all of this happening within a 2-week time frame. You can't tell me that this just happened. No, this is all very deliberate, and it's leading towards something, and it should wake us up when we consider this was published back in December of 2014. They knew ahead of time the script and all this stuff, and we're going to look at a few of these things. These things don't just happen. They knew these would happen a certain way, and they portrayed that and they told that. So let's review it real quick. A lot of our attention we've been looking at, especially over the last few weeks, has been about Alice. Alice in Wonderland as a symbol type, an archetype, but also a reference to CERN and the project there, going through the looking glass, going to the underworld, all of that. There's a lot of symbolism attached to Alice, very rich in symbolism. But then we've also looked at the dates, November 5th and November 3rd, which seems to portray Satan again does not know the day or hour, but he seems to know the time frame when God is going to unrestrain him and allow him to do what he wants. But he doesn't quite know the mark yet. But when you think about it, again, going back to December when they published this, they knew back then, the season, that all this would happen. That tells you they know a lot more is going to be happening around this time period too, that we need to be very careful and watchful of too. Now, one symbol we've seen a lot, almost every single day over the past 2 weeks, is symbols referencing Apollyon, the destroyer. You could also call him Shiva, Kali, known by different names. But Apollyon the destroyer, the one-eyed, who's known as the one-eyed freak. And we find references to that concept and that pattern on the cover as well. We see Angela Merkel with her hands, the way she holds them all the time. It's very deliberate signaling. She's always been signaling. And you could see even on the cover up close, her button, it forms an eye, bringing attention to the eye. All the symbolism on this cover is related to the eye, the one with the eye. But it's not the only reference, because we see right in the middle a guy wearing an Oculus virtual reality display. An Oculus, an eye. It comes from the Latin oculus, for eye. So you have this guy, almost the exact center of the entire magazine, up and down, left and right almost, who's wearing a gigantic single eye, and it even has a logo on it. You could zoom in on the cover and see that single eye right in the middle of it. That's what this whole cover is about, his coming onto the scene. Apollyon, the one-eyed guy. Now you see there in the lower right, the older logo showed the actual eye, but they just recently switched it to a slit eye. Where have we seen that recently? Oh yeah, the Star Wars freak. He has a slit eye. Which also brings up the next symbol of Apollyon. David Cameron and the pig, the slotted pig. Now, of course, not too long ago, it came out in the news that he had put his genitals into the mouth of a dead pig. That's not something you hear on the news all the time, so it should definitely catch people's attention when they hear it. Especially when they're familiar with the cover, David Cameron, who has a pig on his suit coming out from him. It came out that him and his pig. Very definite symbol. You can't make this stuff up. It's not something that just happens coincidentally. David Cameron in a story about pig. But it's very interesting, as vulgar as the story sounds, that storyline is very important to the symbology because it's referencing the phallus, the male genitals. And the phallus has long been nicknamed the one-eyed monster, which is also, in a sense, hinted at on the pink pig. I don't want to be graphic here, but that's what they're saying. The message of the cover is, when you hear about a story of the one-eyed monster involving David Cameron and the pig, you know that's the time that the real one-eyed monster is going to be coming onto the scene. And why is this in reference to him? Because that's what the story is about. Osiris, the ancient god Osiris. What was he known for? His willy was cut off. That's what he's known for. And that's what's symbolized in the Vatican courtyard. That's what an obelisk stands for. His private that was cut off. And that's why sex magic is so involved in the occult. And that's why it's a big part. That's why fornication in the Bible repeatedly talked about stay away from Baal and the worship of Ashtaroth and the poles and the stocks, and just cut all that down, burn it, don't let it into your society at all and life. This goes way, way, way back. And at the Vatican, we see the phallic symbol, the one-eyed monster, right in the middle of a sun wheel, referencing Jupiter, and Ishtar's wheel, the smaller wheel in there too, Isis. There's a lot of pagan symbolism. And of course, the George Washington Monument in America, it symbolizes the exact same thing. It's a gigantic phallus right in front of the occult reflecting pool. And it also is encircled by a circle too as well, which represents the female aspect, the Isis, Ishtar, whatnot. It's an occult sex act right there in our capital city. If that explains why, well, yeah. Symbolism has been going on for a long time, and that's why we see a lot of this going on right now related to Apollyon and Osiris. So here on the cover we see 3 references to Apollyon. And so that's our clue that the rest of the events will revolve around him as well. And the opening of the pit, Alice going through the looking glass, going down the rabbit hole. All those events are centered around, it's going to be involving Apollyon too. So he also saw the Cheshire Cat with Obama, him coming out as gay a lot more prominently, pretty much all but saying it, but he's becoming visible for who he is. Probably a lot more is going to be coming out about him and his wife. But then we also saw the clownfish references. And then we also saw the cricket all-star games this week, and on American soil. They made a big deal about that too. And then we saw drones just yesterday. Drones in connection with nuclear weapons and in connection with ISIS. We've seen the references to ghosts. This 2-week pattern covers the days of the dead, the holy days, particularly from a satanic perspective. Halloween, the days of the dead, All Souls Day, Halloween, all that. And can include the 13 days after Halloween too as well, which also includes Diwali, the Festival of Lights. So there's a lot of ghost things, and Spectre, the movie about ghosts, came out. And then we've seen ISIS being splattered, and then also putting out videos about splattering. The moon, the phases of the moon, particularly tells us and points to us that we should be looking at the Chinese lunar calendar, which put 9/23 right between the 2 English dates, or Gregorian dates, 11/5, 11/3. And so again, another anchor to orient people by what they should be looking at. We've seen nuclear references to nuclear blasts with the multiple ballistic missile launches that have been happening. They're very prominent missile launches, so everyone can see them. And that's really what it's about. It's not to rattle sabers and to scare the Russians and all that. No, it's to be seen. It's a sign to Satan's disciples. It's supposed to be seen. And then the picture, I'm not quite sure of yet, but it might be a reference to CERN's picture contest that they had the other day, which just by itself is a strong fit too with Alice and all that, and they are connected. So we've also seen recently China really flexing its muscles, especially with the Spratly Islands and that whole deal. So China's definitely getting stronger, America's getting weaker. We've seen panic. We've seen panic a lot. The 13 days before Halloween and even after, references to Pan, who causes panic and fear of war, Phobos. We've seen a lot of that. A lot of symbolized references to that. The rocket car. This could be a reference to a second rocket launch, but it's hard to say for sure unless something more clear about Castrol or the Bloodhound comes out. Spider-Man, we've seen 3 or 4 references just within the past week almost to him, specifically even linking him to time and Kronos. A very public Spider-Man figures climbing a business building. Another one happened of climbing the Eiffel Tower. A lot going on with Spider-Man. The World Rugby Cup ended right on Halloween. Again, a lot of these symbols are pointing to the time, this time, and he's telling his disciples, when you see these signs, pay attention because something is about to happen. And it seems to be primarily relating to Apollyon. And the turtle is pretty much the lowest bottom. You come to the conclusion down him, he seems to be the conclusion. He's all by himself too. With emphasis, they even highlight the shell. Take shelter, take shelter. So Satan has his plans put together, apparently, and he's telling his disciples to get themselves ready because something is about to happen. Now, when we look at everything that has happened just within the past 2 weeks, we can get a little overwhelmed and start to lose the tree for the forest. So let's take just a quick look. Let me show it to you a different way. If we look at just the fulfillments of the program guide that they've handed out, and we see the different references that have been made to them, within the past 14 days, there are 36 signals given. This is not a coincidence, folks. This is very, very deliberate. They are pointing specifically to this time that they knew quite some time ago. All this stuff was going to happen within this window. We need to be watchful. The hour is very late. Now, don't worry about politics. Just forget about politics. Forget about sports. Forget about the distractions that media has to offer you. They're offering them to you as bread and circuses to distract you from the world, what's going on right now. Christian, when we see Satan busy, and we see the enemy busy, and the serpents being busy, when we see all of them being busy, that should not overwhelm us or fill us with fear. That should make us realize, if he's that busy and he's getting ready to put up that much offense, how much more our God is about to do. And when we read the book of Revelation and we see how he is going to, with a rod of iron, break the nations and crush the rebellion on this world, we know our God is much more powerful. No matter what the enemy is doing and how organized they may seem to be, our God is much more. That is whom we serve. And as ambassadors of Christ, we need to stay ready as porters, as stewards, as servants, as soldiers, as light, as sheep. We need to be ready for our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I hope he finds you ready, waiting, and eager to see his face. Watching for Christ's return is not just eye service, morbid curiosity, or even mental knowledge. It is a heart condition that affects our life and actions. 1 John 3:3, And every man that hath this hope in him purifieth himself, even as he is pure. Maranatha.